The cashier's hand moved to the last item on the belt, a small tin of soup, the kind with the red and white label that cost 49 cents and had been sitting in the woman's basket along with 3 other things, a loaf of bread, a carton of eggs, and a bunch of bananas that had gone slightly soft at the tips. And Dean Martin, standing second in line with a carton of orange juice and a newspaper he hadn't planned to buy, watched the tin get moved to the side of the belt, with the specific, careful motion of someone performing a task they have performed before and would prefer not to be performing now. And something in him went very still. The store was a Ralph's on Fairfax, a Tuesday in October 1968. The kind of morning that has no particular ambition, no weather worth noting, no quality that would make it memorable to anyone who moved through it without stopping. Fluorescent lights over long aisles, linoleum floors that reflected the overhead light in pale strips. The sound of a price check being called over the intercom somewhere near the back. The smell of bread from the bakery section 2 aisles over, warm and indifferent to everything happening at Register 4. Outside, the October air was doing what October air does in Los Angeles, which is pretend to be autumn without fully committing. Warm enough in the sun that you didn't need a jacket, but cool enough in the shade that the jacket made sense. And the parking lot held the usual Tuesday morning assortment of cars belonging to people running errands they would not remember by the weekend. Dean had come in without a plan. He had a session at Capitol in the afternoon, something his manager had arranged and he had agreed to in the approximate way he agreed to most things that didn't require him to think too carefully. And between the morning and the session there was time, and he had found himself in the car without quite remembering deciding to drive, and the Ralph's on Fairfax was there, and he was out of orange juice, and that was the entire logic of his Tuesday morning. He had his hands in the pockets of a plain dark jacket, collar open, no tie. The version of himself that existed between the versions the public knew. Not the tuxedo, not the television smile, just a man in a jacket buying orange juice. He had not noticed the woman until he was already in line. The Capitol session was at 3. His manager had called twice that morning about something related to the arrangement for one of the tracks, something that required a decision Dean hadn't made yet and wasn't entirely ready to make, and he had let both calls go to the answering service because the morning felt like it needed to be quiet before the afternoon required him to be present. The orange juice was an excuse. He had known it was an excuse when he pulled into the parking lot, and he had pulled in anyway because sometimes the body knows what it needs before the mind has caught up, and what he needed on this particular Tuesday was 20 minutes inside an ordinary place doing an ordinary thing with no one expecting anything from him. She was at Register 4, directly ahead of him, and the line had only one person in it, which was why he had chosen it. And that person was her. She was small. The kind of small that accumulates over decades rather than being present from the beginning, as if life had gradually compressed her toward the earth in the gentle, persistent way that life does. A beige wool coat with a brooch at the collar, a small gold thing in the shape of a flower, the kind of brooch that gets chosen carefully and worn for years, white hair pinned with the precision of someone for whom this particular detail still mattered. Her basket had been modest. The bread, the eggs, the bananas, the soup, 4 items. The shopping of a person who knows exactly what she needs and has calculated accordingly, who has been doing this calculation for long enough that it no longer requires a list. The cashier was young, early 20s. A name tag that said Patricia in block letters. The specific professional neutrality of someone 8 hours into a shift who has stopped seeing the individual people at the end of the belt and begun seeing only the transaction. She had scanned the 4 items. She had said the total. The woman had opened her purse, and the purse had told a story immediately, the kind of story that doesn't require words, just the particular quality of someone looking into a wallet and finding it different from what they'd expected. The woman had counted what she had. She had looked up at Patricia and said something quietly, her voice arranged into the shape of an apology, and Patricia had sighed, not loudly, just the small controlled exhale of someone adjusting to a complication, and had begun moving items to the side. The bananas went first, then the soup. Dean watched the tin of soup get placed carefully to the right of the register, next to the bananas, and the woman stood looking at what remained, the bread and the eggs, and she was doing the arithmetic in her head, the arithmetic of what she had versus what she needed. And her hands, which had been still while she counted her money, had developed the slight tremor that hands develop when they are trying to hold something steady that keeps wanting to shake. Behind Dean, a man in a work jacket shifted his weight and glanced at his watch. Dean took his hands out of his jacket pockets. He stepped forward, past his own items on the belt, and he stood next to the woman, and he looked not at Patricia and not at the register but at the woman's face, and what he saw there was not the embarrassment that he'd expected, though that was present, visible in the set of her jaw, and the way she was not quite making eye contact with anyone, but something else underneath it, something older and heavier, the specific expression of someone who has been managing with dignity for a very long time and has just arrived at the moment where the managing becomes visible to strangers, which is a different and more difficult thing than the managing itself. He said, "Which ones don't you want to leave behind?" Patricia's hand stopped over the register. The woman turned and looked at him for the first time, really looked. And the question was so different from what she'd been bracing for. The payment, the charity, the transaction, that it took her a moment to process it, to understand that she was being asked to choose rather than being given something, to understand that the question was not about what she could afford but about what she wanted, which was a thing nobody in the last several minutes had thought to ask. She said, "I beg your pardon?" Dean said it again. "Which ones don't you want to leave behind?" The woman looked at the bananas and the soup sitting to the right of the register. She looked at them with the specific attention of someone reconsidering something they had already let go of. Then she looked back at Dean, and her eyes had changed. Something moving in them that hadn't been there a moment ago. She said, "The soup. My husband used to make soup on Tuesdays." Dean nodded, the small nod of someone receiving information that matters. He reached past her and picked up the tin of soup and placed it back on the belt with her bread and her eggs. Then he picked up the bananas and looked at them, slightly soft at the tips, the specific over-ripeness that means they are 2 days from being perfect for banana bread. And he placed them on the belt too. Then he put his orange juice and his newspaper on the belt behind them, and he said to Patricia. Together, Patricia looked at him. The recognition was arriving in stages, the way recognition arrives when someone is out of the context in which you know them, when the person in front of you doesn't match the place where you've only ever seen them before. She knew the face. She knew it from somewhere specific. The knowing was assembling itself from pieces while her hand moved automatically to scan the soup and the bananas back into the transaction. The woman said, "Sir, I can't allow you to..." Dean said, "You're not allowing me anything. I'm buying orange juice. Your groceries happen to be on the same belt." He said it the way he said things when he meant them completely. Without performance, without the warmth that he deployed so easily in front of audiences. Just the fact of it. Just the thing being true and needing no further architecture. The woman looked at him for a long moment. Her hands had stopped trembling. She said, "You remind me of someone." Dean said, "That happens." She said, "My husband used to ask questions like that. Not what do you need, but what don't you want to leave behind?" He said there was a difference. She paused. He passed in 1959. The store had gotten quieter around them. Not silent. The intercom was still calling a price check somewhere near the back. The refrigeration units were still humming in the next aisle. But the specific quality of the noise had changed, the way it changes when a group of people who were all separately absorbed in their own business have gradually, without quite deciding to, begun paying attention to the same thing. Patricia had finished scanning. She said the total quietly. Dean handed her a bill without looking at it, and Patricia made change, and the transaction was done, and the woman's groceries were bagged. The bread and the eggs and the bananas and the soup, all 4 of them, the whole Tuesday. And she stood holding the bag with both hands, and she looked at Dean the way people look at someone when they have something to say and are not sure they have the right to say it. She said, "May I ask your name?" Dean told her. The recognition that moved across her face was different from Patricia's, slower. It came not from seeing someone out of context, but from hearing a name and having the name fill in the space around a person in a particular way, adding layers, adding history, adding the specific weight of knowing who someone is after you've already understood something about who they are. She said, "I've heard your records. My husband liked Everybody Loves Somebody." She said it simply, the way you say something that is just true. He used to play it on Sunday mornings. Dean said, "That's a good morning for it." She smiled then. A small smile. The kind that doesn't announce itself but is completely real. The kind that comes from somewhere specific and means something specific rather than being the general expression of social warmth. It was the first time her face had fully released since he'd stepped up to the belt, and it changed everything about her face, and Dean saw in it what she must have looked like on a Sunday morning in 1958 with the record playing and her husband in the kitchen making soup. She said, "Thank you." For the question especially. She took her bag and she walked toward the exit with the careful walk of someone whose hips hurt on cold days and who has learned not to show it in public. At the door she stopped for just a moment and adjusted the brooch at her collar, the small gold flower, a tiny precise gesture that had nothing to do with anyone watching and everything to do with herself, the lifelong habit of someone who had always taken care of the details. Then she went through the door, and the door closed behind her, and the parking lot received her, and the Tuesday continued. Dean picked up his orange juice and his newspaper. Patricia was looking at him. The recognition had fully assembled itself during the transaction, and she was now looking at him with an expression that contained several things she had not entirely sorted out yet. He said, "Have a good shift." She said, "Mr. Martin," and then stopped, because she had started the sentence without knowing where it was going, which is what happens when something has just occurred that doesn't fit the categories you have for things that occur. He waited. She said, "The question you asked her. Which ones don't you want to leave behind?" She paused. Nobody's ever asked anyone that in this line. People give money, people pay the difference. Sometimes people buy things for strangers, but nobody asks. She paused again, her hand resting on the edge of the register. The way she looked when you asked it. Dean said she'd been letting go of things for a long time. Patricia nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure she understood what he meant, or rather she understood it, but had not known until this moment that it was a thing she understood, that it lived in her already, waiting for someone to hand her the words for it. Dean walked toward the exit. Outside, the parking lot was the same parking lot it had been 20 minutes ago. Same cars, same October air, same indifferent Tuesday. And he got into his car and sat for a moment before starting the engine. Through the store window he could see Register 4 from this angle. Patricia still at her position, the belt empty now, the next customer unloading a cart. The store had returned to itself, the price check intercom, the hum of the refrigeration units, the ordinary texture of a Tuesday morning in Los Angeles. He started the engine and pulled out of the lot and pointed the car toward Capitol, where the session was waiting and the arrangement decision was waiting and his manager's 2 unreturned calls were waiting, and none of that felt as present or as real as the 6 words he had said to a woman in a beige wool coat. 6 words that had cost him nothing and had been, he understood now as he turned onto Fairfax, the most useful thing he had done all morning. The man in the work jacket behind him, who had been checking his watch, had put his watch away. He was holding his grocery basket and watching Dean go with an expression he would not have been able to describe accurately, but which was in the neighborhood of gratitude, though he had not been given anything and would not have said he needed anything, except that something had happened in Register 4 on a Tuesday morning that had made the morning different from what it had been when he'd walked in. The woman's name was Miriam. She was 73 years old. She had been married for 31 years to a man named Harold, who had worked at the post office and made soup on Tuesdays and played Dean Martin records on Sunday mornings, and who had died of a heart attack in 1959 at the age of 61, which was too young, which is what the people at the funeral had said, and which was true but which had not made it any easier to be 61 and dying, or any easier to be the person left behind. She lived in a 1-bedroom apartment on Sweetser, and managed on what came each month from the government, which was enough for most things most of the time, but occasionally, when the timing of bills and the timing of income produced the wrong arithmetic, left her standing at a register counting what she had and finding it short. She told her neighbor about it that evening. Her neighbor was a woman named Gloria who was 68 and had lived in the apartment across the hall for 11 years, and who brought Miriam soup occasionally, not on Tuesdays, on Thursdays, and who listened to the story of the Ralphs on Fairfax with the attention of someone hearing something important. Gloria said, "He asked which ones you didn't want to leave behind?" Miriam said, "Not what I needed, what I didn't want to leave." Gloria sat with that for a moment. Then she said, "Harold used to ask questions like that." Miriam said, "That's what I told him." Gloria said, "What did he say?" Miriam said, "He said that happens." They sat in Miriam's kitchen for another hour and ate the soup. She had made it with the tin from the Ralphs, the way Harold used to make it, with a little pepper and some bread on the side. And outside the window, the October evening did what October evenings do in Los Angeles, which is cool slowly and turn the light amber and make everything look briefly like something worth keeping. Patricia told her mother about it that night on the phone. Her mother asked what he had been like, and Patricia said he had been quiet and certain. The way people are when they've made a decision, and the decision doesn't require anything from anyone else. Her mother asked if she had gotten his autograph, and Patricia said no, and her mother said that was probably right, and Patricia said she thought so too, that it would have been the wrong thing to add to what had already happened, like putting a frame around something that was better without one. She kept the story for years, told it at Thanksgiving once, told it to a colleague who was having a bad week, told it when people asked about the strangest or most memorable thing that had happened to her in 12 years of working checkout. She told it the same way every time, beginning with the tin of soup being moved to the side of the register and ending with the question, because that was where the story lived, in the 6 words that had made the woman's hand stop trembling. Which ones don't you want to leave behind? The question that turned charity into something else, that turned the transaction into a conversation, that said, "I see what you're doing and I want you to have it, all of it, every piece of the Tuesday you planned for yourself when you made your list." The capital session that afternoon went well, or well enough. The arrangement decision got made the way arrangement decisions get made, when you stop overthinking them and simply choose. His manager did not ask where he had been in the morning, and Dean did not say, "The orange juice was in a bag in the back seat of the car and he drank it cold on the way home that evening, and it was good." The specific satisfaction of a thing that had been its own reason. Miriam lived until 1974. She spent those 6 years with her groceries paid for on time, her brooch cleaned and pinned each morning, her soup made on Tuesdays. She never learned exactly why Dean Martin had been in the Ralphs on Fairfax that particular Tuesday, never knew about the capital session in the afternoon or the orange juice or the newspaper, never knew any of the ordinary machinery that had produced the extraordinary accident of him standing behind her in line 4 on an unremarkable October morning. She knew only what had happened, which was enough, which was more than enough, which was the thing she told Gloria about in the kitchen over soup, which was that a stranger had asked the right question. Harold, she thought, would have liked him. If this brought back a memory or a thought you'd like to share, leave it in the comments. I read every single one and I reply to each one personally. If you enjoyed spending this time here, I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing. A simple like also helps more than you'd think.